have accepted the contract. We've spawned a random car in a random location. We've made sure the car has spawned in properly. We grabbed the network ID just for demonstrative purposes. We're not going to use that today, but we will in the future. And we set a blip for the location. We set a waypoint. That's your GPS marker. So that's going to set the player's GPS marker to where the car is. And then we're going to trigger this next event. That's going to be the next one we write. All right, so we need to register the net event that we just referenced. So it's always a good idea to copy the event so that you make sure you don't have any typos, which I'm really bad about. And then I always hit enter twice and put in the end just to get rid of all the underlines. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to check if the player has gotten the vehicle yet. So we're going to create a variable called local has vehicle. That's just our variable. It's going to be false because they don't have the vehicle yet. And then we're going to have to put in a while loop. The reason we created the has vehicle is because we're going to say while not has vehicle, we're going to run this loop. As soon as they get the vehicle, we're going to set has vehicle to true, and it'll exit this loop. We'll get there in a minute. Okay, so we need to know their player ped. Player ped ID. Okay, so what this will return the player, the client's. Excuse me. Give me a second. I need a drink. Everybody still with me? Everybody's learning stuff?
We're here.
Yep.
We're here.
We're all here.
All right. Just making sure my mic's still on. Okay, so the player ped, this native player ped ID is going to return the player's entity. So each player has an entity, which is just a number that's generated when they log into the server. And that's how, in all the scripts, that's how you reference their location, their person, and everything else. So we want to identify their entity is what we're doing here. You can also put -1 here. That's kind of old method, but -1 works. But this just means if you leave it blank, it just means to return the player who belongs to this client. All right, and so we did our loop. We identified our player ped. We also want to identify the vehicle that we're wanting to reference. And since we put repo vehicle here outside of a function, it's available to everything below it. So if we wanted to reference repo vehicle up here in one of these functions, we would need to move this up because the script is only going to recognize stuff that's above it. So like if you put in repo vehicle in any of these functions, it's not going to recognize it because you haven't identified that variable. But we're below it, so we're fine to do it here because we're not referencing that above. So anyway, since we put repo vehicle there, we can reference it right here. And then we already got the end there. Well, not what was it not like in here? Vehicle, local vehicle. Oh wait, no. What? Hold on. I'm screwing up. Ignore everything that just happened. None of that is important. Oh, I know why, because I put equals equals. We're not doing an if statement. It's just equal that. Okay, and repo vehicle was identified here. So that's when we spawned the vehicle. And so that created the entity ID for the vehicle, and we're just referencing that vehicle entity ID here. All right, so if the vehicle, this is where we need the equals equals. Equals equals in an if statement means is. Okay, so what we're saying here is if the vehicle that the player is, if vehicle equals repo vehicle, that means that there is a repo vehicle. Wait a second. I did this completely wrong. All right, I'm sorry guys. Ignore everything that just happened. This would reference the entity, but we don't want to reference the entity. We want to get vehicle ped is in here. And it's going to be player ped. And it's going to be false. Okay, this is misspelled. All right, this is another native. So if we go look at the native over here, there it is. The first value is ped, and the second value is last vehicle. So last vehicle is described here. It's a true or false value, and it represents the current vehicle the ped is in, and true represents the last vehicle the ped was in. We want it to reference the one that the ped is in currently. And so we should have used false. Did we use false? We did use false. So if the player is not in a vehicle, then this is nil. Okay. Yeah, if this is nil if the player is not in a vehicle. As soon as they get into any vehicle, this is going to return the entity number of the vehicle that the player is in. Doesn't matter which seat they're in. They could be in the passenger, back seat, whatever. If they're in a vehicle, it's going to return that vehicle's entity ID. So now what we want to check is if the vehicle equals is the repo vehicle, then we want to do stuff. We don't care if they're in a different vehicle. So if they're in a different vehicle, this will be false, and it'll just skip this section. And this, I did not type that. That was Copilot. That's not what we want to do. So the first thing we do whenever this is true is we want to say, yes, they have the vehicle. So this is now true. So they have the vehicle. And then we're going to trigger an event to let the server to do the next things that we need to do. And that event is going to be vehicle secured. We're going to write that next. And that is all we have to do to check if they're in the vehicle or not. Now, anytime you do a while loop, you have to have a wait. I do not recommend 0. You'll see a lot of people that do a wait of 0 in their scripts. That is resource intensive. It's a bad idea. You should at least put 1 millisecond. In this case, we're doing 500 milliseconds, which is a half a second. So every half a second is going to check the vehicle they're in and see if it's the repo vehicle. As soon as it is the repo vehicle, then this value becomes true. This is no longer true, and so it's going to exit the loop. As soon as they get in the vehicle they're supposed to be delivering, it's going to wait a half a second and check. So whenever they get into it, it's going to check and it's going to say, okay, yeah, this is true. This is true. Let's trigger this event, and then we're going to exit the loop because this is no longer true. Clear as mud. And very important, you have to have the wait. If you do while not something and then end and you don't have a wait in here, you will crash 100% every time. It's called an infinite loop because it just is run, and you don't have enough processor speed to do that, and so you will crash. All right, so now we're ready to register our next event that we just triggered, and it is going to be called ACV less than 2 vehicles secured. And you gotta do function, and then open close, and then end. All right. So what are we wanting to do now? So the vehicle is secured, so we said we want to delete the blip that was marking where the vehicle was. We want to create a blip where their delivery cords are. We want to set a new waypoint where their delivery cords are. And that's what we want to do here. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the blip that we created first. And that's another FiveM native called remove blip. And then we just have to tell it which blip, and it's the repo blip. We created repo blip here. We identified the sprite and everything there. So that's the blip that we just removed. So that one will no longer show up on their map. It'll be removed. We got to get their player ped. Do this, Control C. I'll do this. We're going to don't need that one. We want to get their chords. We want to know where they're at. So this is another FiveM native get entity chords. The entity is the player ped, and so this is just going to return their coordinates where they're located at. All right, we want to know what are the delivery chords. We're gonna set up a variable that's 000 because we're gonna actually assign it later, but we're gonna go ahead and set up our variable here because we're gonna use it in a couple of places below. We want to set our delivery distance to really high. We're going to use a really high number because we want, as we're calculating to find where the closest delivery chord is, we want this number to be high so that every answer that it gets is better than that answer. So you just want to put a really high number here so that you'll see in a second when we do our loop to find the closest location. We're going to update that, so that'll be clear in a second. Okay, so we're going to do another for loop. And this time we're going to be, again, Copilot is pretty smart. It knows where I'm going. I'm going to delete all this because I don't know if that's right yet. Oh, excuse me. Those ribs are repeating on me. Okay, now to do what we're going to do here, we have a vector 4 entered for our delivery chords. It's a vector 4. But for the task that we're about to do, we want to use x, y, and z values. So what we're going to do is we're going to say x, comma y, comma z equals table.unpack j.chords. And we could even put a comma h here if we wanted because it's a vector 4. But basically this is going to grab the first 3 chords the first 3 values it gets from the table. So we are running a loop. We explained the loops before. I'm not going to beat it again. But we're running the loop through the config delivery chords table. So we're running a loop through this table. Shit. I got click happy. What's this? I don't know what that is. All right. So we're running a loop through this table. All right. And okay. And so for each iteration of the loop, it's going to grab the X, Y, and Z chords. Now we want to take those X, Y, and Z chords and we want to find out how far away from the player those are. So we're going to go local destination chords. My headset turned off, I think. Can you hear me now?
Just for a split second.
Okay. I don't know why it does that. It's crazy. Anyway, we're back at it. Luckily, I heard it make the little metallic click sound, so I knew it was off that time. All right. Local destination chords equals vector 3. And that's XYZ. So I've basically taken this vector 4 and I've converted it into a vector 3 by unpacking it, getting the XYZ, and then re-entering them in a vector 3. The reason I want to do that is because my player chords are always returned as a vector 3. And I'm going to be checking the distance between the player and all of these chords. And so I have to have the same units. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay.
You're good.
All right. So then to calculate the distance, I created a variable. I did not. Where did I create the variable? Oh, I missed one. Right here, I should have had a variable called local current distance, and that would be equal to 0.0. Okay. So after I've defined my destination chords, then I want to calculate the current distance between the player chords and the destination chords. And the way you do that is you do current distance and you put a hashtag in front of your open and close bracket. Nope, I just moved it. You put a hashtag in front. That just means return a number. Because this calculation is going to be a weird calculation because it's 2 vector 3s. And so it's going to calculate another like vector 3. that has an X, Y, and Z value in it, but this hashtag in front is going to convert that to a whole number, and it's going to be the distance. That's as best I can explain that. It takes a vector 3 that was calculated from this subtraction, and it just converts it into a whole number. So then what we want to do is we want to check if that current distance that we just calculated is less than our delivery distance. Let me delete that because I don't know if that's right yet. So if the distance calculated between the player and the chords that we pulled from our loop in this table is less than delivery distance, which we set as a very, very high number. That's why we did that. If you set this as 0.0, you'll never get an answer here because they're not on the location. So you have to set this as a high number because we want to change its value. So the very first one that it does through the loop is absolutely going to be true. And what we're going to do is we're going to set, if that statement is true, then our delivery chords that we defined here as a vector 0 is going to equal, what's it going to equal? It's going to equal the j dot chords. So if this statement is true, then it's going to equal whichever vector we're iterating on. It will be our delivery chords now. All right, and our delivery distance is going to equal the current distance. So that's going to reset 0 to whatever our calculated distance was here whenever we calculated current distance. So we calculated it there. So that's going to return that whole number. And then that's going to be the end of that. And the end of that. Okay, so this for loop right here is cycling through this table. For each iteration, it's taking this vector 4 and it's converting it to a vector 3 here. And then it's calculating the distance between the player and the core and the destination. And if that distance is less than the previous result, which the first result is 9999999, so if this statement is true, then it's going to reset the delivery chords to whatever value we're in. It's the j value. And it's going to set delivery distance to the current distance for that iteration. Then it's going to check the table again, and it's going to grab the next chord. So it's going to do this one first, allegedly. It's a in pairs loop, so it's going to be looping through the table randomly. But anyway, it's going to return that one first, and then it's going to check the next location. If location 2 is closer to the player than the first location, then this statement would be true, and it would be reassigned as the second iteration. And it'll keep looping through the table. If this statement is ever not true, then it's going to skip that one and go to the next one. And that's how we're going to find what is the closest delivery distance. So that is a pretty powerful thing to know, because you can use that for a lot of different reasons. It's the same method. You may not be checking the distance between the player and a specific location. You may be checking the distance between a player and a prop to find the closest prop to them, but you use the same method. So that's a really good method to learn. That's why I taught it in this class. All right, and so then what happens? So now we know, once we've gotten through this loop, then we have defined where we want the player to take the vehicle. So we're going to create a delivery blip. And it's going to be this, because delivery chords is now a vector 3. We converted it to a vector 3 here. All right, so we're going to set up a delivery blip, and this is the same as we did before. We're going to set our blip sprite color. We're going to set our blip sprite, our color, and our scale and our display. That's all the same stuff we did before, so I'm not going to go through that again. And we're going to set a new waypoint, and we've already done that as well. And it's going to be at the delivery chords, X and Y. And then we're going to start a function called check delivery. All right. Now, there's two different ways to launch a function. One is to trigger an event. Another is to just reference a function this way. If it's a FiveM native, these are functions that are recognized by FiveM. This function is not a FiveM native, so I have to define it. And I did this, I could have done this as a trigger event, but I wanted to do it as a function so that I could show you how to properly write a function of this type. So remember, I said that this has to that it'll only reference things that have happened above, right? So if we do this function and then we write the function right below it, it's not going to work. So we're going to scroll up to the top of lesson 2. You always want to have your functions that you write at the top. And this time, instead of putting register net event, we're going to put function, and the function is going to be called check delivery, and it's just to open and close. And I don't know what all this is. That I don't know if any of that is right. We're just going to delete it and put in what we know is right. Okay, so for this function, what I'm doing is I'm checking to see if the player has delivered the vehicle. So as long as they're in the vehicle, I'm going to be wanting to check and see if they have reached the destination and if they have dropped off the vehicle. That's what this function is going to do. So I need to know their player ped entity. I need to know the vehicle that they're in to make sure they're in the correct vehicle. I need to know if they're in delivery range or not, and we'll explain that in a second. So right now they're pretty far away from the delivery, so we're going to do a while loop. So while not delivery range do, and Copilot is trying to write everything for us, but I don't trust it. All right, now we're in a loop now, and this is an important thing to learn about loops as well. So now we're in a loop. I'm going to be checking the player ped distance from the delivery cords to see if they're close enough to deliver yet, if they've gotten within range. Okay. But if I just trust this local that I did here, it's only defined one time. So each time the loop goes through, it's not going to update. And so it's going to be returning the same cords that we initially pulled. Okay. This is very important. I define them outside of here just so I can use them throughout the function. But I have to redefine them here because as the while loop is happening, the player is moving around the server, and we want to make sure we always know where they are. And so the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to check the vehicle that they're in. That's the first thing we're going to do. And we're going to make sure that they're still in the correct vehicle, because if the vehicle is, I wish that Copilot wasn't filling this in for me because it's kind of confusing for everyone, including me. Then, so if the vehicle is the repo vehicle, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this whole thing so that Copilot will quit. I'm going to paste it in and I'm going to explain it. Okay, so if they're in the vehicle, then we want to make sure we know what their cords are. Why is that? That shouldn't be a local. This is just updated. Oh wait, no, we didn't define player cords yet. So we grab their cords and we grab them from their player ped ID. We don't have to redefine the player ped ID one every time because it's going to be the same every time. So we've already got that variable. We don't need to redefine it inside the loop. So we're going to get their cords. We're going to get the delivery cords. And this time, instead of getting the delivery cords from the config table, I created a blip at cords, right? So we created the delivery blip down here, and we had to add blips for the cord. So that's the same coordinates as the config table. So rather than trying to recalculate the config table or re-reference the config table, I'm just going to use this native, which gets the ID cords for the delivery blip. It's the same difference. So we've already defined that, so let's use it, right? Makes things simpler. So that's what this native does. It just pulls the cords from the blip we created. And then just like before, we're going to calculate the distance with our hashtag in front of our player cords minus delivery cords. Both of these values are already in vector 3 because, as I told you, this native always returns a vector 3. And whenever we defined the blip cords, they were defined as a vector 3. And so this is going to be fine. That's going to be a math problem between two vector 3s, and it's going to get the distance. So if the distance is less than 20 meters, then I want the delivery range to be true. That's going to exit the loop, and I want to trigger an event. which is deliver the vehicle. All right, and I've got my wait 1000 here, and that's fine. That's going to mean whenever they're within delivery range, it's only going to wait for 1 second to update. But that's inside this if statement. So if ever this if statement is false, if ever this part is false and it's skipped, I don't have a wait. And so I would have an infinite loop. So I have to put in, after this if statement, I have to put in another wait. And since they're not in delivery range, I don't need to pay as close attention to them. So I'm going to wait for 5 seconds to update that. So whenever they get within 20 distance, until they get within 20 distance, this loop is going to happen every 5 seconds. Once they get within the delivery distance, then the loop is going to happen every 1 second because this statement is true. So it enters this section of the code, and it'll wait for 1000, and then it'll loop through there. Actually, that's incorrect. So I did this wrong. Let me fix it. So here I wanted to find a local wait. I don't want to use capital. I want to use lowercase. Wait equals 5,000, which is my standard wait. I'm going to put an else statement here. Okay, what did I just do? Well, the way I had it written, whenever it went into this if statement, it wasn't going to wait 1 second. It was going to wait a total of 6 seconds because it had a 1 second wait, and then it was going to exit the if statement and it was going to wait for another 5 seconds. So I had actually extended the wait whenever they were in range. That's not what I wanted to do. So I defined a variable called wait. I made it equal to 5 seconds. So if this is true, then it's going to change to 1000. If that's not true, it's going to stay at 5000. Why did I have to do that? Because if I ever enter this and then they go out of range, I want to go back to 5. So if they're in range, it's going to be 1 second now. If they exit range, it's going to go back to 5000. And so for wait, instead of putting a number here, I just put the variable, and we've defined it in 3 places to tell it if we're going to wait 5 seconds or 1 second. Clear as mud? Okay,